So technology is a lot like evolution in that the industry is packed full of contenders battling for recognition or industry supremacy. Though everyone is trying to survive, only a fraction actually make it into the spotlight, and even then only a fraction actually survive their first 2 years. So we have an option. We can either try to test our mettle against an entire industry and sacrifice all of what little time we have to build something that will more than likely fail, or we can try to live comfortably and cut our losses. I'm doing this one for you, Evolution. So I'm gonna build myself a space MMO, or try to. I'm a space hack, so I play a lot of Elite Dangerous, No Man's Sky, and EVE Online, but each seems to have a different piece of the puzzle that I want to bring together. I love the procedural environments of Elite and Star Citizen, so I'm gonna go ahead and incorporate that. Space Legs is of course a huge part of what I want to build, but also ship interiors. I feel that there isn't enough done in this regard, as a lot of developers I've heard from don't find such a thing feasible in Unity. Some even claimed it was impossible. Naturally though, I'm going to prove them wrong. Aside from that, something I believe EVE Online did really well is the player-driven economy. Something about having a market made entirely by players and having to wait for someone real to buy your goods just gets to me. I need more of that in my life. As for the ships I'll use, I've got a ton of models that I've designed over the last year or so that already look pretty good. All that I need to add for them is materials and interiors. That's a significant bit, but my point is I have a head start. So what I like to do is build a clean, functional engine first, and then make it pretty. So many folks try to build a foundation and polish simultaneously because, let's be honest, having a functional engine is really cool, but it feels super good to play your own game when it looks pretty, even if it's missing most of its foundation. Unfortunately, I think this comes to a lot of developers' detriment in that we focus so much on polish that we never finish the base game, and in the end we burn out and have a really cool tech demo. So to avoid this, I'm starting with the base game and I'll build semi-polished assets after significant landmarks as a sort of reward for hard work. Until then, everything visual is going to be placeholders. First thing I wanted to do is get basic planetary gravity working. Unity has a character controller that makes first and third person games a lot easier, but as far as I know, it cannot rotate around its X or Z axis. That won't work when I'm on the bottom side of a planet, so I programmed my own character controller. The way planets work here, since I didn't actually want every astral body in the scene applying forces to every other object in the scene, I don't know why, I like to optimize things. I just created a force field that applies to the player once they reach a certain proximity to a planet. This way, once the player gets close enough, then gravity starts slowly working its magic and the player auto-aligns their y-axis to the center of the planet, allowing for proper orientation. I don't see a whole lot of reason for players to jump out of their ships and free fall into planets, but you never know. Next up is basic first-person shooter controls and mechanics. I built some pretty basic guns to tinker around with and implemented basic FPS controls such as WASD, jump, sprint, aim, shoot. You can swap weapons with others and alternate between a primary and secondary weapon. For now, since I wanted to get right to making spaceships, I put off making any NPC enemies till later. So then the fun part, spaceships and ship interiors. I pulled a model of one of the first ever ships of design and gave it rudimentary parts. Some landing gear, an elevator, and a pilot seat. After that I created a basic ship movement controller and played around with my work. So the real hard part with ship interiors is actually localized physics system. This is one of the reasons Star Citizen is so popular, is because they're one of the few who actually decided it'd be worth solving. Just because you're in a spaceship doesn't mean that you're immune to all the outside forces of the universe, and it doesn't mean you're simply going to move with the ship. By default, there's no gravitational force that pulls you to the bottom of the ship, and even if there is, that doesn't mean that there's enough in-ship friction to keep you from sliding immediately to the back of the ship or outright clipping out of it altogether during acceleration. So I needed to create a localized physics system that carries me with the ship, simulates artificial gravity, because why not, and didn't bash my head into the ceiling every time the craft pitches upward. We need to pretend that the ship is the entire universe and that all outside forces somehow don't affect the player inside. One way to solve this is to move the entire universe instead of the player as the player is trying to navigate around or move. This is what Outer Wilds does, and while that's a brilliant idea, I just can't bring myself to do something like that. For reasons, it just feels like too much. Another way is to somehow record all of the motion of the ship and use trigonometry to track the player's position relative to the ship. Another way to do this is with parenting, but you can't parent a rigid body to a rigid body, so unless for some odd reason I decide to make ships static bodies with manually programmed physics, that also isn't a great option. The route I decided to go with is sort of manually wrangling physics. I'd share, but I'm going to wait until this game is actually finished. Point is, the internet said it couldn't be done, but I did it anyway. Don't trust anything on the internet. Or do, because they're not all that bad. I don't know, do what you want. The next thing I wanted to tackle, which is honestly something I'm really excited about, is procedural planets. There's a lot of ways to do this. One of the most common ways is by creating a normalized subdivided cube, and then changing the subdivisions within each square of the cube to match the player's depth or distance to it. I chose to ignore this route for whatever reason, and decided to just go with a subdivided icosahedron that subdivides the sides depending on the player's distance to it. This is honestly a huge challenge and still is. I'm starting just by subdividing the polygons on the surface and applying a noise texture to it. My way of doing this is by creating a custom polygon object and nesting all of its subdivided polygons into it, and then nesting their own subdivisions within themselves, and so forth. Iteration was pretty straightforward. The hard part is handling when subdivisions actually happen, and debugging with literally thousands of objects to keep track of. After I was satisfied with the generation enough to pat myself on the back, I built myself a pretty little space station in Blender to give a feeling for scale and what it's like to explore inside. Nothing really happens in here yet, but soon, you'll see. Next was NPCs of some sort. The technology I built thus far was cool, but I needed something to interact with, so I created a default male model in Blender, rigged and animated some essential animations, and then threw it into Unity as a foundation for future character builds. Now that I have a basic character that can stand around, let's give him a gun and some sort of AI. I decided on a basic state machine that picks random times to alternate between standing, turning, walking, and so forth. With built-in obstacle detection, it's semi-realistic. I'll build something better later, but for now I just need something to start with. Hey, that looks good. He's walking around and being a little dinker. Look at him dink around. Let's try to piss him off and see what happens. Is he tilted? Hold on a second. That should do it. Finally, after everything was said and done, I really felt a lack of polish or aesthetic, considering I had spent all of my efforts doing nothing but building an engine. So I went ahead and imported one of my newer-ish models and added some semblance of the material, gave it a basic but slightly larger interior, and attached all the controllers to let it behave as a flyable ship. It's not done by any means, but it looks a lot better than the first ship I added. So I've got a lot more to work on. Procedural generation is pulling me in, and I think I'm going to work on that next. NPC pathfinding, of course, needs to be implemented along with maybe an inventory system and some basic transactional system. I'll be working on this over time and keeping you guys updated, so stay tuned and happy spacing! This video is sponsored by Form and Void Games. Every once in a while I feel the urgent need to physically handle a spaceship, and when I do, I haplessly throw my money at Form and Void Games on Etsy for one of their spaceship models. Use them for tabletop gaming such as Starfinder or Warhammer, and if you're really feeling it, you can get a larger model specifically for display. Sizes come in smaller, slightly larger, and then finally extra large for you hungry spacemen and women out there. Each model is an original piece and 3D printed in environmentally friendly PLA plastic. They not only look amazing, but they also look amazing. This is it. This is what life is all about. Buying spaceships so that the owner can use the money to make even bigger and slightly more functional spaceships. Who knows? The owner might even make a video game one day. Form and Void Games Etsy shop is linked in the description below. That said, have a great day, everyone.